And joining us now, incoming White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Jen, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning, Chris. Great. Thanks for having me, Chris. Great to be here.
This week, the incoming White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Jen O'Malley-Dillon, talked about working with Republicans, and here's what she said. I'm not saying they're not a bunch of effers. Mitch McConnell is terrible. She later apologized for the words, but not the sentiment. Why does President-elect Biden think he's going to be able to do business with such people?
Well, first, Chris, I know everybody's busy around this holiday season, but I'd encourage everybody to read the full context of her interview. And what she really talked about through the course of the interview was the importance of working together, that compromise is essential, that we need to listen to one another. So, you know, of course, I'm sure her mother didn't like the word she used, but that's a sentiment that the president-elect has sent to all of us, and we're expected to work toward that goal. You know, I don't think we're naive, Chris, about how hard it may be at times. There's disagreement in Washington. We all know that. We've all been around this town for some time, but we're hopeful that because of the crises we're facing, from the pandemic to millions of people out of work, that we'll be able to make progress. And the deal that we're seeing come together is a small sign of evidence of that.
Then there are the Biden nominees for top positions in the cabinet, which are drawing fire from both the right and the left. Here are some examples of that.
It's so disappointing to see him continue to roll out these far-left nominees that belie the points he's made since the election, that he wants to govern in a sense of unity or from the middle.
If you're asking me, have we seen the kind of progressive appointments, nominations that I would like to see, the answer is not yet.
When Republicans say there's no chance they'll confirm Neera Tanden as budget director, when some Democrats say they won't approve a waiver to let retired General Lloyd Austin serve as defense secretary, does President-elect Biden, Jen, think that they're bluffing?
I don't think President-elect Biden would nominate anyone he didn't think was qualified and didn't think should deserve consideration and confirmation by the United States Senate. And look, we didn't expect that every nominee would be embraced by every corner of our political system. That's simply impossible in the environment we're living through. But all of these nominees, many of the ones you've mentioned, have already spent time meeting with members, Democrats. Many have met with Republicans. That will continue in January. And we're hopeful that the Senate will move quickly to confirm nominees who will be addressing the crises we face, Chris. We need people leading these departments to help address the pandemic, rebuild our place in the world. And I don't think anyone would question the qualifications of people like Janet Yellen, Tony Blinken, Ali Mayorkas, and many of the others that the president-elect has nominated.
After the Electoral College voted this week to make Joe Biden the president, he said this. Take a look.
The flame of democracy was lit in this nation a long time ago. And we now know nothing, not even a pandemic or an abuse of power, can extinguish that flame.
Does the president-elect believe, his use of the phrase abuse of power, does he believe that President Trump has engaged in an abuse of power in the way he has contested this election?
Look, Chris, we've had a lot of conversations about this internally. There's been dozens of lawsuits, as you know, across the country that President Trump has tried to overturn the election through. They've all failed. Where our focus at this point is on getting the president-elect inaugurated a month from today, facing the pandemic, getting the pandemic under control, putting millions of people back to work. It doesn't take us to say there have been moments where there have been abuses of power. Others have certainly said that. But our focus is on doing the work of the American people, and we're trying to keep our blinders on with that.
Well, let me ask you about a report in the New York Times today that says that as recently as Friday, President Trump in the Oval Office discussed the possibility of seizing voting machines, even discussed the possibility of invoking martial law. Your reaction to those reports?
Well, Chris, I'll leave it to others you'll have on your panel today and others you'll have as guests to explain what on earth is happening in the Oval Office and in the White House. But, you know, as I noted, it's actually a month from today that President-elect Joe Biden will take the oath of office. And there's just too much going on in this country, from thousands of people dying every day of COVID to millions of people out of work to relationships that have long been frayed over the last few years, for us to worry too much about whatever's happening in the Oval Office. We know that he's tried to challenge the results of the election. They were certified this last week. Leadership of the Republican Party has acknowledged the outcome of the election, and we've started to see some work together to get nominees confirmed, to get packages in place. That's where our focus is going to be in the weeks ahead.
You have said several times, and it's exactly right, that a month from today, Joe Biden will be on the west front of the Capitol and take the oath of office. Does the president-elect care whether Donald Trump attends the inauguration? Does he even want him there?
I would say it's not on the top 10 list, or even longer than that, of his focus for priorities at this point in time. Chris, as you know, and you've covered many transitions, I've been a part of transitions myself. This is not a traditional transition, but I will say we have had a great deal of cooperation from the men and women who have been serving the civil service at agencies across the government. That's been encouraging. They're the heart and soul of the government and how the government continues year after year after year through Democratic and Republican presidents. There have been limited, cases of, abrupt behavior, including at times from the president himself, the president of the United States himself. But our focus is we're not going to worry about that. Our focus is on getting the president-elect inaugurated, on pursuing our agenda moving forward, on getting the pandemic under control, on taking on the Herculean task of distributing the vaccine, which is going to be a big part of our focus in the first couple of months. And so we're not too worried about who does or doesn't attend the inauguration.
Stephen Colbert asked President-elect Biden this week about the investigation of his son, Hunter, and this was the response from Mr. Biden.
I am not concerned about any accusations been made against him. It's used to get to me. I think it's kind of foul play, but look, it is what it is.
Afterwards, you clarified that when Mr. Biden talked about foul play, he was talking about politicians, Republicans playing politics with the attacks on Joe Biden. He wasn't talking about the investigation itself. So let me ask you directly, does the President-elect Biden believe that the investigation of his son Hunter on tax issues, does he believe that's a legitimate investigation?
Well, first, Chris, let me say, to the credit of Fox, you reported the context of the question accurately, which had nothing to do with an investigation. It was about Hunter being used as a political cudgel in a partisan way, and a question to the president-elect about how he would work across the aisle and work with Democrats and Republicans to get things done. So that was actually the question. To his credit, through the course of that questioning, he said, regardless of the attacks on his family at times, he would do what's right for the American people. There will be, he is working and thinking now, no decision has been made about who he's going to nominate to be the Attorney General. He's been emphatic that that person will oversee an independent department. He's looking for somebody of the highest level of integrity. And that person, whomever it is, will be overseeing whatever investigations are happening at the Department of Justice. And that's how it should work, frankly, Chris. So that's what we'll be relying on moving forward.
Let me pursue that a little bit with you, Jen, because there is a lot of concern among Republicans as to whether or not President Biden is going to stop the investigation of his son. So a couple of specifics here. Does he promise to let David Weiss, who is the U.S. attorney in Delaware who is currently conducting the investigation of Hunter Biden, does he promise to allow him to finish the job? And what does he think of President Trump possibly appointing a special counsel to conduct an independent investigation of Hunter Biden?
Well, let me be crystal clear, Chris, and I appreciate you asking this question. He will not be discussing an investigation of his son with any attorney general candidates. He will not be discussing it with anyone he is considering for the role, and he will not be discussing it with a future attorney general. It will be up to the purview of a future attorney general in his administration to determine how to handle any investigation. As you know, U.S. attorneys are, that's a personnel decision. We're far from there at this point in the process, given we haven't announced yet an attorney general, a commerce secretary, a labor secretary, an education secretary. We have a few more to go, but we're going to allow the process to work how it should, which is for a Justice Department to be run independently by the Attorney General at the top.
Finally, there has been some criticism recently from conservatives, including some conservatives on Fox News, about the fact that First Lady-to-be Jill Biden goes by the title doctor. I wonder, what is the Biden's reaction to that, especially given the fact that so many people over the years, I think of Dr. Henry Kissinger, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, have gone by the title doctor, even though they're not medical doctors, and nobody seems to have made a fuss about that.
That's exactly right, Chris. It's a bit perplexing to me, and I'm sure to millions of Americans, that with thousands of people dying every day of COVID, millions out of work, that anyone would wake up in the morning and decide that the focus they need to have, the way they contribute to society that day, is to question whether or not Dr. Jill Biden, someone who's still teaching, who has a PhD in education, should be called a doctor or not. Of course she should, as anyone who works through that challenging process of getting a PhD. It's a really silly, sexist, and absurd conversation that's happening a bit in society, and I appreciate you asking me about it.
Jen, thank you. Thanks for your time. Please come back and Merry Christmas.